To create this skirt pattern, I'm going to be working with the following materials. I have my pattern master here on the right hand side. I have my tape measure to take down my measurement, my marker pen, some pins when it's time to actually cut and sew, my long metal ruler, and some pattern paper. So the skirt design I'm deciding on requires a fabric that is sort of semi-structural and has some weight. So I'm going to be working with this cotton drill fabric, which has polyester and cotton blend, and it has a nice body. It feels somewhat like denim. I also got a matching lining in this oatmeal color. I got about 2 meters of each, like the lining and then the main fabric. I also got a matching invisible skirt zip, as well as some interlining to stiffen the waistband of the skirt. You will need to consider the following measurements for this skirt design. Measure around your waistline, around your tummy area, which is where your belly button is. Decide on how wide you want your waistband to be. Measure around your hip, as well as decide on the skirt length. So this is what the skirt design looks like. It's something that I sort of like wanted to try out, this sort of like balloony bubble effect, and I've decided to divide the video into 3 chunks so it's easy to digest. In the first half we cut the pattern, the second half we cut the skirt, and then the third half we sew the skirt all together. So starting out with the pattern making or pattern cutting, I'm going to be planning the front of the skirt, and I'm going in by drawing a horizontal line like so, and on this line I'm going to be marking 1/4 of my waist measurement. So once you mark that along this line like this, you then mark upwards 1/2 inch, so I'm able to curve that 1/2 inch elevated point back to the horizontal line, and this just allows the skirt to sit a lot nicer on the tummy. Next up, for the waistband, I'm going to be working with 5 inches width, and I've marked that across like this, and I'm squaring it across from one edge to the other. And then along this waistband line, I'm going to be marking 1/4 of my tummy or around belly button measurement. So I went ahead to join the waistline point to the tummy point like so. I ended up changing this up later on in this video because I wanted the skirt to be a lot looser around that tummy area. So I'm going in here to add a notch because there's going to be a seam connecting the waistband to the lining or the bottom half of the skirt, and from that belly line I am marking 14 inches downwards. This is going to be the lining of the skirt, and I'm just squaring this point across like so. And along this lining hem, I initially marked about 10 inches for the width, which I connected to the belly edge line. So this I changed up because I went back in to ensure that my hip distance was correct and the skirt would actually fit, and sort of the vertical distance from my waist to my hip is roughly 10 inches, and if you mark that across horizontally like I'm doing now, you get an idea of how much your hip should be. So my hip measurement is 39. If I divide that by 4, it should be about 9.75. So I realized I had to open up the side seam a little bit to accommodate my hips. So I just went across to create an A-line silhouette from the waist all the way to the hem, and then I connected that back to the hemline of my lining. So just ignore the first line inside like that. We're going to be working with the A-line on the outer edge. So the top half is the waistband, and then the bottom half is going to be the lining, and then I'm going to go in and trace off the separate pattern pieces, starting off with the lining, which is the bottom or the wider part of this front plan. So I'm just tracing around the side seam like so, around that belly line like this, adding our notched point because this would really be important when it's time to sew. And then I'm going back in to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance around the waist, the side, and the hem. So I went back into that bottom edge on the side seam just to make it a straight point instead of at an angle, and that just makes sewing the bottom of the outer skirt into the lining a lot easier. So I went ahead to cut out that pattern piece, add my grain line, my annotations. You need to cut one piece of this on a fold for the front and use the same pattern for the back, just add a seam allowance on that sort of center front edge. I went ahead to trace off my waistband piece, added my seam allowance around except at that center front edge, added my grain line, and for the waistband you need to cut 2 pairs so we can finish it off nicely on the top edge. For the outer skirt, which is what becomes the balloon feature that this piece has, I'm starting off by tracing off that belly line like so, and from there mark 19 inches downwards. You want it to be longer than your lining piece, and then I went ahead to extend that belly line by adding about 16 inches to whatever that measurement was. So you want it to be longer so you can gather it back into the seam along that point. So now I'm just marking 19 inches across all the way to the other end, join them together using this long horizontal line like so, and I'm drawing in an A-line silhouette because I actually want the bottom to be slightly wider than the top of this outer skirt piece. So I'm going to go ahead and add a 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way around, so this allows me to stitch up the back to the front and then cut out the piece, add my annotations, add my grain line, so I know that this piece I need to gather back into the waist or belly seam of the skirt. So these are all of the pattern pieces I decided to work with. If you want to, you can actually create the back pieces. So the difference between the front and the back is that center back edge, which is the CF you can see here, you would need to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance, so that lets you fix a zip on the center back of the skirt. But because I was conserving paper, I decided to use the same pattern to cut the front and the back. The only difference is I cut the front using the pattern the way it is, and then for the back I added a seam allowance on the center back edge. So I'm just going in now to cut off my front waistband piece like so. You will need to cut 2 pairs for the waistband, and then I'm cutting the outer skirt, and then I went ahead to use the same pattern to cut my back waistband and my back outer skirt pieces. And I remember to add my 1 centimeter seam allowance because that way I can connect both sides of the back together, as well as add a zip when it's actually time to add fastening to the skirt. So I'm just finishing off cutting off this piece here like so, making my way till the end, and these are all of the skirt pieces that you should have. So we have the main outer skirt, which you should have 1 pair for the back and then 1 long piece for the front, and then I have my lining pieces, which is slightly smaller in this oatmeal lining fabric. And then for the waistbands, I went ahead to fuse them on the wrong side of the fabric because I wanted the waistband to be really nice and stiff. So I did this for the back waistband and for the front waistbands as well. Now it's time to sew. I'm going to be starting out by putting right sides together of my waistband. You should actually end up with 2 sets, so you could close them off together on the top edge. And I'm going to be sewing up the side seams of both sets and pressing them nice and flat because this way I can join it to the bottom half of the skirt. So for this bottom outer panel, I went ahead to put right sides together of my back pieces to my front, and I'm going to be joining the side seams like I did with the waistband. I'm going to be sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance from the beginning all the way till the end. I use regular tension and a normal stitch because the fabric is a woven fabric and it's fairly stable. So I did this for the left and for the right hand side, and then I went back in, and with the longest stitch on my machine, I actually stitched all the way across the top and the bottom. You can do this in batches if you're worried the thread might break when you go back to pull that thread to create the gathers that this skirt has, and which actually helps to make the balloon shape that the skirt design sort of features. So I went ahead to pull all of the threads. I did it for the left and for the right hand side. That's why there's a little bit of a space in the middle. And then I'm going to be joining 1 set of the waistband to the top half of this gathered edge of the skirt. So I'm going to be stitching this all the way across, so I have the waistband connected to that gathered edge of the outer skirt like so. And then like this, you can go ahead and fix the zip into the center back of the skirt. So I'm working with an invisible zip because I just think they look so beautiful when done correctly on seams. So I'm just using this one like so. I've pinned it into the open center back seam. and I'm going to be stitching the zip into that center back edge using a narrow invisible zip footer. So once I do this in this direction for this side and make my way till the end, I turn it the other way and then stitch it back to the top of the waistband of the skirt. So once I'm done stitching up the zip into that open center back edge, I then go back in and close up the bottom area that is open. So I always like to pin seams first before stitching, but if you are sort of comfortable with handling fabric, then you don't need to add pins. So I'm going to stitch up from the very point that the zip ends to the hemline of the skirt. So that closes off the back hemline and you don't have any open ends on the back of the skirt. So I went ahead to press that seam open so it looks nice and neat, and then you can go ahead and work on your lining pieces. So I've put right sides together of my front and back linings, and I'm going to be joining up the side seam but leaving an opening that is about 3 inches wide, because this is how we're going to turn the skirt inside out. So I pressed my seams nice and flat, and you can see my opening there like so, and I'm going to be joining the other set of waistband to this top edge of the lining. So this way, once I sew that zip edge close, I finish off the inside of the skirt as well. So now that I'll have our waistband and lining fused together, steamed and ready to go, I'm going to be grabbing the skirt that already has the zip fixed in place, and I'm going to be pinning the center back edge where the zip tape actually is. I'm going to be pinning those edges together, pinning along the waistline, and we're going to be joining the lining waistband set to the actual main skirt. This is just a very nice way to finish off that top waistline edge, finish up the inside of the garment as well, and it just looks really nice and clean. So I'm sewing my way up like so, and when I reach that top edge, like 1 centimeter before I reach that edge, I leave my needle in, turn the garment towards myself, drop my footer, and then I continue to sew all the way across, sew along the back, the front, waistline until I make my way to the other side, repeat the same thing, and then stitch till the very end of this particular area here. So I'm just going in here to trim off the corners before turning my piece inside out and giving it a nice press. You have the option of doing an edge stitch that sews the seam allowance to the facing on the inside. That just helps that seam there to relax a lot more naturally. So next up, I'm just going in here to sew close the bottom edge of our lining, and that is going to conceal the raw edge on the inside of the garment. So I'm sewing from the bottom all the way to the top. I'm stitching right until the point that I can't anymore, which is where the zip of your skirt is. So I went ahead to give my seams a nice press to relax all of the stitching, and this is what the inside of the skirt is looking like. It's always so satisfying when the top edge of your garment aligns. It just looks so good, and it's something I'm always very happy when I achieve, even though I don't get it all the time. So next up, we're going to be pulling the long stitch that we did along the bottom edge of the skirt, and when you pull that thread on the seam like so, you sort of create gathers that forces the garment to fold inwards like this. So now I'm just going in here to join the lining hemline to the outer skirt hemline. This is a bit tricky, so just take your time pinning it in the right direction. You want to put right sides together, side seams together, center front to center front, center back to center back, before taking to your machine to actually stitch them together. Because of how the piece is actually made, you would have to actually pull some parts out so you can actually stitch it, but it's possible, I promise. So I'm just going in to join that hem line like so, and remember that hole that we left open, that is a hole that will be able to pull the entire skirt inside out, so we have a nice finished seam on the hemline of your skirt. And because the width of your lining is narrower than the width of your actual outer skirt, it forces it to create this balloon effect. So I'm just going in here to pin close the opening that we left that allowed us to turn the skirt inside out, and I'm going to be top stitching that edge close ever so slightly and ever so closely to the edge, so it looks really nice and tidy even on the inside of the garment. So after finishing the seam, your piece is complete. Feel free to steam your garment. Because of the shape that this piece has, I suggest steaming rather than ironing it flat, else it loses that fluffiness that it has because of all of the gathering and pleating that we have done. But I actually really like this piece. I just wish I had somewhere to wear it to, because it came out really modern, really structural. And if you guys enjoyed with this project, feel free to recreate it on your own terms. Just make sure to tag me on Instagram at KimDaveDesigns, and I would love to see your recreations. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment your thoughts, ideas and suggestions down below, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.